I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Tim Blake Nelson, who stars in Old Henry. Tim, I went into this movie cold. I knew nothing about it at all, apart from you being in it. And I really hope as many people as possible get to see this film knowing nothing. So we're going to have to try to skirt around some details, okay?
Sure.
Let's try not to give anything away, but we do have to talk about the film. So if anyone really doesn't want to know anything, go away, go and see the film, come back. Now, how do you normally set up this film for people without giving away, the plot and what happens during the film? How do you talk about it with people?
I simply say it's an old-fashioned, unapologetic meat and potatoes Western. And it has everything that you want in a Western in terms of violence, tension, and scope, not to mention a bag full of money and horses and lots of gunfire, but it also tells a very intimate story between a father and a son.
Yeah, that's good. I think that really sums it up nicely. To me, I was trying to pinpoint towards halfway through the film, is this a redemption story about a man with a past, which is another trope in the Western genre? Is it about revenge, something that we all love to watch? Is it about protecting your son or your home? Is it a fable, really, just about their relationship? And I think you'd probably say it's all of those things. Don't you agree?
I would, and I think that Westerns of any scope do try to incorporate many of the many of the tropes that are associated with Westerns in one movie. I think that the really good Westerns engage the genre on a lot of different levels. And engaging the genre is really important to me because I like when movies are unafraid to do so, and then within that risk surprising you. And I think this movie does that. I think this movie does that. And because it's a low budget film, there's a leanness to it. I don't think you could point to any fat in this movie. It really does tell its story very economically. And because it's so stripped down, there's a relentless building tension that just really that never lets you go.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the keys for why this film is works so well. I found it really riveting and engaging because it just doesn't really let up. Maybe the first 15 minutes you're just kind of getting into the groove of what the movie's about, but then it just doesn't stop. It's an hour and a half long. There's, as you say, no fat. The one thing as well that reminded me about why I love this genre is because it's so beautiful to look at. A lot of that credit goes to DP John Matisiak. It's one of the fascinating juxtapositions, don't you think, of this genre? It's gorgeous and beautiful, but yet it's so unforgiving, filled with ruthless men and women, and like every day seems like life and death. Is that one of the things what about what you love about westerns? Because you've done a few.
Well, and I'm glad you talked about John Matishak. I think it's a beautifully shot film by John, and his collaboration with the writer director Pozzi Ponzaroli,
Yeah.
I think is fantastic. They were really hand in glove, and I think it's a beautifully directed and shot film. I see westerns, to me, it's a really fascinating genre because I think it's the most quintessentially American of all the film genres, even more than horror movies, because although there can be westerns, there are Australian westerns, there are Japanese westerns, there are Spanish westerns, European westerns, so there are westerns set in Scandinavia. So it's a genre that can transcend borders, but I think it's really ultimately quintessentially American. And I say that because you've got westward expansion. So it's about moving into uncharted territory and trying to hold on to land. That's always an issue in the westerns, in westerns, or to civilize, and the tensions between what that actually means and what the intent is. So there's always land expansion or land taming involved in westerns. They're violent. They're centered around the gun. And so when you put those two together, westward expansion in America happened at a time when guns began to proliferate, as opposed to a place like Europe, or even, I would say, Australia, where when expansion happened, there were different weapons used. Particularly in Europe, you had swords and maces and siege engines. You didn't have guns when the borders were decided on in Europe. And then the Western hero is a rugged individualist. And Americans are all about individual rights. And that's a major difference between us and, say, the Europeans, because Europeans embrace collectivism. And I'm not taking sides, I'm just defining individual rights and what I would say that manifests in a Western as the maverick go on his own hero, who takes justice into his own hands and either circumvents authority or fights against authority, which is usually hapless. And all that comes together in the film medium, which is also originally an American popular art form. Now the whole world does it, and many countries do it better than we do. But it originated in America as this mass art form. And that all comes together in the Western film genre. And I love being a part of that as an American actor.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. And thank you for reminding us about those particular aspects, because, for example, individualism is so quintessentially American. And many people from outside America still to this day don't quite understand what that means, but it's absolutely, and you can see it in current politics and, you know, the pandemic. And yeah, that's really interesting how you could tie that to the Western genre. It's very true. Talking more specifically about Old Henry, the first note I made when I was watching the film last week was, this guy's no farmer. And then I started to really kind of clue into your performance. He's weary, mysterious, ambiguous, unassuming though, but also quite unsettling. What can you talk us through what you and writer-director Pontiroli were going for from the outset with this guy?
Well, what I originally appreciated in the script and really admired in terms of what Potsy had come up with was that at its heart, the story is addressing the tension all parents go through in terms of raising their children between, do you expose your offspring to the dangers and challenges and violence of the outside world by way of preparing them for it, or do you protect them so that childhood can last as long as possible and they can grow up confident and loving rather than laced with fear and paranoia.
Yeah.
And I'm the father of 3 boys, and my wife and I are raising them together. And this is a constant discussion between us, and it's a constant internal discussion that I have. Do I protect these kids or make them go out and face the mean old world? And I really loved that aspect of this story inside of a meat and potatoes Western. And so really my work with Potsy, which was fairly extensive, was about rooting it in the character and in the time. Because, as is very clear from the outset of the film, there's more to this character that you're going to learn as the film goes on. And we wanted to be responsible to the specifics of that. And that involved a tremendous amount of research on Potsy's and my part, and then bringing that into a collaboration, if you will, on the character between the writer, director, and me, that thankfully he was willing to do, especially once I made it clear that, look, the last word is always going to be yours, but let's work on this together so we can build a character who answers all the challenges and exciting demands that your script has on the page. And so it was really a process of working on that literally for months and months. At the end, for the last month, several hours a day with Potsy, just going through the material, and a tremendous amount of research we both did into the time and circumstances that end up getting revealed about this character.
That's an extraordinary amount of commitment that you both decided to undertake for this role. You could have taken the more easier way out, just read, understood the character and just played the role and be done with it. But I felt so immersed, not only in the location and time, but also in this character. But what fascinated me as well is when there's a moment where he, we know he's going to defend his home and his son, but when he says to the writers, and this is no spoiler, we're expecting there to be some kind of fighting or a bloodshed, turn around and get off my property, do that and I'll let you live. I was pretty much on my feet saying, yes, he's a badass. He's transformed, and I didn't even see it coming. Can you talk us through the transformation as well? Because it's pretty gradual.
Yeah, what really interested me about the part was the unmasking of him. In fact, you could describe this movie as the unmasking of a father and farmer into a killer, a protector and a killer, I guess. That could be a one-line description of the movie. And I was really interested in the challenge of how gradually to do that. And over my career as an actor, which started out playing really, really small roles, and then they began to get bigger as my 30-year now career began to transpire. I've just learned to become more responsible in terms of caring for my performance as to where it is in the story. And I've gotten better at that. I can look back on some of my early films where I started to get larger roles and think, my God, you're out of place in that scene. You seem in a place in terms of your character and his needs and the stuff arrayed against him. You seem to be in an earlier scene, or you seem to be playing a scene that's 2 scenes ahead. You're not in the moment of that scene, simply because you didn't, when you woke up that day to play the role, to play those scenes, you didn't recognize where you were in the story. It's so darn basic. And when you're doing a play, you're acting sequentially, and that's very easy. Unless it's fragmented in time, but leave that aside. In a movie, you're shooting out of order because it's based on other exigencies. And so I've just demanded more of myself in terms of knowing where I am in the story. And this felt like an extra challenge in this role, which is one of the reasons I want to do it. Because in addition to being in the narrative trajectory, there's this other unmasking that's taking place. that's beyond the nuts and bolts of the story, and that's coming from within the guy as certain stuff is triggered by the circumstances around it. And I don't know, I put a lot of thought into it, and there's also something I do now with roles, which is I learn the entire part before I shoot a single day. And that just gives me a more holistic understanding of the part. And I find that I'm never lost when I'm getting to set. I know where the character is and in the trajectory of the story.
Yeah, and I think audiences are sophisticated enough to know when that's when an actor and a production is really like has taken this seriously, and it makes the film so much more immersive. It really is. It's a really immersive experience. My final questions. This role is very physical, and there's a lot of gunslinging and obviously stunts, and you would have spent probably months in pre-production preparing for this physically, because like me, we're not in our 20s, and so I do my back out when I pick something up from the floor. So I just watch you doing this thinking, geez, what the hell? But it's a topical issue. Without passing judgment on what happened on the Rust film set, guns in Hollywood now is a topical thing. And I just wonder, that would have taken a lot of effort, time, and I guess practice to make that work so authentically, wouldn't it?
Well, I did do an enormous amount of prep for this role, and particularly with the guns. And we had an excellent, very experienced armorer on this film. And I was working with the guns on a daily basis for a good 3 weeks. And with the pistol, a lot longer than that. I actually had it sent up to my house in New York well in advance of arriving early on set. So I had it for another 3 weeks in New York before I went down for 3 weeks of pre-production. And I was just loading it and unloading it constantly, because you have to look like the gun is an appendage. And this to me is a privilege of acting, is getting to learn new stuff and to embrace the demands, of looking like you've been doing something all your life. I will say only in terms of the safety issues that we had an impeccable safety crew on this movie. And we were a 21-day shoot, but never once was a shortcut taken. And I never felt unsafe, and I don't think anybody else did on this movie. They were incredibly careful with it, and that's very much to our producers Shannon Houchins and Mike Haggerty, and our director Patsy Ponceroli and his AD Eric. We just took it very, very seriously, and I never felt unsafe. We just didn't have those issues on this movie.
Yeah, and obviously that's, it's thank God that happened. Tim, I had so much fun with this film. I hope everyone watching this goes out and sees the film. Do yourself a favor. It's a really fun, great movie to immerse yourself in. Congrats on a great role, and good luck this upcoming award season and your future projects.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure to talk to you.